Single dad was fired and walking home. That's what the report said, right? The medic's voice cracked through the rain as 2 helicopters slammed onto the road, rotor wash shaking the night. Fine, then where's the doctor? Somebody find the doctor right now. Another medic froze when the girl on the stretcher choked violently for air. Then the man they'd fired an hour earlier stepped out of the dark with impossible calm. Because the janitor they dismissed was the only trauma surgeon within miles. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. Because in moments like this, the world finally sees the people it tries to erase. He didn't argue with the chaos erupting in front of him. He didn't defend himself against the insult that had just echoed across the landing zone. He stood silently at the edge of the road, rain sliding off his shoulders, watching the crisis take shape exactly where fate had dragged him. He didn't expect anyone to recognize him. Why would they? To the hospital, he had been the man with a mop. To management, he had been an easy target for blame. To his son, he was just Dad, the man who packed lunches, explained math homework, and tried to keep their little world steady. But beneath all that was the part of him he'd buried. The surgeon who once made life-or-death calls under fire. He had left the hospital less than an hour earlier, carrying a cardboard box of belongings and Milo's sticker-covered lunchbox. Fired for a mistake he didn't make. Blamed for something a supervisor overlooked. But he accepted it quietly for the same reason he accepted every blow life had thrown at him. Because his son needed him to keep standing. He planned to walk home, heat leftovers, and pretend today's humiliation didn't hurt. Instead, the sky split open with helicopter lights, and the world forced him to face the part of himself he'd been running from. He didn't have a badge anymore. No ID, no authority. Just the instinct that never truly dies in someone who's held too many fading pulses in their hands. He saw it immediately. The girl's collapsing airway, the medic's hesitation, the widening horror on the governor's face. He recognized the signs, the urgency, the narrowing window of survival. It wasn't the kind of medical emergency solved with clean gloves and calm voices. This was the kind where seconds bleed into the ground, where noise swallows logic, where someone either acts or a child dies. His feet moved before his mind caught up. He wasn't rushing, he wasn't posturing. He was simply answering a call his body understood better than his heart wanted to. He approached the barrier where security pushed back civilians. A guard stepped in front of him, irritated, waving him back with an impatient flick. Elias didn't argue. He just leaned enough to see the girl again, her chest barely lifting. He remembered scenes like this all too well. Desert heat, improvised tools, frantic soldiers begging him to save their friends. He remembered performing impossible procedures with nothing but grit and instinct. And he remembered the night everything shattered. The night he couldn't save the woman he loved most. But tonight wasn't about him. It was about a child who had seconds left. He took another step. Rain hit his collar. Sirens wailed in the distance. The governor shouted for a doctor, any doctor, but the hospital's on-call physician was stuck behind a major accident downtown. The medics were outmatched. The girl's airway was closing. Every piece of the puzzle snapped into place inside him. He stepped forward again, ignoring the guard's glare. His breathing slowed, his mind sharpened. His posture shifted into something precise, controlled, unmistakably professional. The guard touched his arm, ready to shove him back. Elias didn't retreat. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't announce who he was. He didn't need to. He simply moved with the quiet certainty of someone who had saved lives in worse places than this storm-drenched road. His eyes stayed fixed on the girl. The way her head tilted, the way her throat strained, the way the medic's hands trembled. He could hear the governor's wife sobbing through the storm. He could see the fear in the team's faces, the kind that comes when even trained professionals know they're out of their depth. He knew exactly what procedure she needed. He knew how long she had, and he knew the medic wasn't going to do it in time. Another step. The guard tried to block him again. Elias shifted sideways without breaking focus, slipping past the arm in a motion so practiced it startled the guard into hesitation. He wasn't here as a fired janitor. He wasn't here as a man running from his past. He wasn't here for recognition or apology. He was here because a child's life was measured in seconds, and he was the only one who understood how quickly those seconds were disappearing. He stepped forward, fully, decisively, into the storm, the chaos, and the life he swore he'd left behind. He stepped fully into the storm, and for a moment everything paused. The guard's hand suspended midair, the medics frozen in panic, the governor's voice swallowed by rotor noise. The girl's strangled gasp cut through all of it. Elias moved toward her with the calm of someone who had walked into chaos more times than he cared to remember. The guard hesitated, confusion flickering across his face as he tried to decide whether to stop him or get out of the way. Elias didn't wait for the decision. He slipped past the outstretched arm, eyes locked on the failing airway that every second tightened like a fist. The medics recoiled when he reached the stretcher. They didn't recognize him, only saw a drenched civilian with no authority. But his presence carried a gravity that made hesitation feel dangerous. The girl's neck muscles strained, her lips shading toward blue, and Elias's voice cut through the noise, steady and specific. She has less than 30 seconds before a full obstruction. The lead medic blinked at him, startled by the precision. Elias didn't break eye contact. Tilt her slightly, her airways collapsing inward. If you wait for the doctor who's not coming, she dies. Governor Kessler spun toward them. Rain streaked across his suit, fear hollowing his eyes. Who are you? Why are you touching her? Back away. His sentence choked off when he saw the medic glance at Elias, silently asking if this stranger might actually know what to do. Elias didn't answer the governor. He didn't justify himself. He simply shifted the girl's head and assessed the pulse at her neck. Weak, erratic, dropping. He'd seen this pattern in the field, traumatic swelling, a blocked airway, panic making everything worse. Dr. Lavinia Clark rushed from the second, helicopter. Equipment bag half unzipped, breath uneven. She kneeled beside the stretcher and froze when she saw Elias's hands already positioned with practiced confidence. Who? She didn't finish. Something in the posture, the controlled movements, the unflinching assessment triggered recognition. She didn't know where she'd heard the name Elias Ward. Until now, the missing connection slammed into place. But she couldn't question it yet. The girl was seconds from respiratory arrest. The governor barked again. Somebody remove him. But even security hesitated. Elias radiated a strange calm, the kind that didn't match the uniform he'd been wearing an hour earlier. He didn't speak loudly, but every word landed with command. I need a scalpel, a rigid catheter and suction. If you don't have suction, give me the smallest tubing and manual pressure now. Dr. Clark snapped out of her shock and rummaged through the disorganized kit with frantic hands. We're missing half the airway tools, she muttered, panic rising. We weren't prepared for... Then give me what you do have, Elias said, voice steady, almost quiet. His certainty steadied her. Governor Kessler stepped closer, face pale. This is my daughter. If you touch her again without telling me who you are, I'll... Elias finally lifted his eyes, meeting the governor's with the weight of a man who'd watched fathers lose children in far more brutal circumstances. Sir, he said, calm but unyielding. "Your daughter won't make it to the hospital. You can argue with me, or you can let me save her." It wasn't a plea, it was a fact. The governor froze, torn between fear and disbelief. Dr. Clark shoved the equipment into Elias's hands with a trembling whisper. "Do it." Elias didn't hesitate. He positioned himself beside the stretcher, fingers moving with a rhythm his muscles remembered even after years of silence. The medics formed a tense half-circle around him, unsure if they were witnessing madness or mastery. Elias steadied the girl's jaw, assessing the swelling. The trachea was nearly closed. A tremor of wind shook the helicopter beside them. The urgency condensed into the kind of silence only crises can carve. A silence where every breath counts, every heartbeat echoes, every decision slices open fate. Elias inhaled once, letting the noise fade into background pressure. He had done procedures like this in the dark, in sandstorms under gunfire. A rainy roadside was almost merciful in comparison. Still, this felt heavier than any battlefield. This was a child whose parents stood close enough to watch every move. He made the incision with the scalpel Dr. Clark handed him. Precise, clean, controlled. The medics gasped. Elias guided the catheter carefully through the narrow opening before swelling shut the last channel of air. The girl's body jerked, then trembled, then slowly, painfully slowly, pulled in the smallest whisper of breath through the improvised airway. Dr. Clark exhaled so hard her shoulders fell. "She's oxygenating," one medic whispered. "Holy!" Another medic covered his mouth in disbelief. Governor Kessler staggered back a step, watching the impossible happen under pounding rain. His daughter's chest lifted again, not much, but enough to signal life clawing its way back. Elias kept working, steadying her breathing rhythm with controlled pressure. He didn't bask in the shock around him. He didn't look at the governor or the medics or the guard who tried to stop him. His focus stayed on the girl, her pulse, her oxygenation, her fragile return from the edge. Only when her breathing stabilized did he allow himself a breath. He raised his eyes toward Dr. Clark, who looked at him with the disbelief of someone witnessing a myth walk into reality. "Who are you?" she whispered, voice barely audible over the storm. He didn't answer. Not yet. He simply said, "She's stable enough to move. Prep the helicopter. We don't have long." And for the first time since the chaos erupted, everyone listened to him. He stood over the stretcher, rain rolling off his sleeves, as the medics scrambled to follow his instructions. The girl's breathing held steady, faint but rhythmic, and the tension around the helicopter shifted from frantic panic to stunned obedience. Dr. Clark moved beside him, tightening straps and preparing equipment exactly as he directed. Moments ago, she had doubted him. Now she matched his pace without a single question. "She'll hold," he said quietly, eyes on the girl's fragile chest rise. "But we need to move now." Governor Kessler stepped forward, soaked and trembling, staring at Elias as though trying to decipher a riddle written in a language he'd never learned. Who gave you the right to do this?" His voice cracked, not with arrogance but with fear. So sharp, it bordered on desperation. Elias didn't flinch. He kept his attention on the airway placement, adjusting the catheter ever so slightly to improve airflow. "I took the right because she didn't have time for anyone else," he said, tone calm but final. "And because you needed someone who knew what he was doing." The governor's mouth opened again, ready to challenge him, but the weight of the truth silenced him. He watched the faint rise and fall of his daughter's chest, watched the impossible stability Elias had managed to create, and for a moment he forgot how to speak. Dr. Clark stepped in, her voice low but firm. Governor. He saved her. Without him, she would have gone into full respiratory arrest. The governor swallowed hard. He knew she was right. And it terrified him that the man who saved his daughter was someone he'd dismissed the moment he saw the soaked janitor's uniform. But there was no time to unpack that shock. The rotors began to spin, faster, preparing for takeoff. The pilot shouted over the noise, "We're clear for medical lift. If we're going, we go now." Elias checked the girl one last time. The swelling in her airway wasn't done. It would worsen. Every minute counted. "Get her inside," he said. "Head elevated. Keep the line stable. Don't change the angle." Dr. Clark nodded and signaled the team. 2 medics gently lifted the stretcher, carrying her into the helicopter. Elias stepped back to allow them to board, but not far. His focus stayed locked on the patient even when the governor stormed toward him again. This time, there was no shouting, just a raw, incredulous whisper. "How did you know what to do?" Elias didn't turn his head. "Experience." "Experience doesn't teach that," the governor pressed, staring at him with an intensity that bordered on disbelief. Not that level, not that calmness. Elias remained still, gaze fixed on the helicopter interior. It was Dr. Clark who broke the silence, stepping close enough that the governor could hear her over the storm. "He didn't guess," she said. "He performed a textbook airway incision under field conditions. That requires surgical training, advanced training." Elias shot her a brief look, but she ignored it. The governor's eyes widened. "You're telling me—" "I'm telling you," she continued, "that whoever he is, he's no janitor." The governor took a full step back as if the revelation physically struck him. His daughter was alive because of a man whose name he didn't know, a man he'd nearly ordered dragged away. Elias didn't entertain their questions. He boarded the edge of the helicopter skid, steadying himself against the frame long enough to ensure the girl was correctly positioned inside. Dr. Clark glanced at him. "We could use you in the air," she said, hesitant but hopeful. "Your presence could stabilize her through transit." Elias shook, his head gently. "She'll be stable as long as you don't move the line. Keep her airway supported and monitor pulse drops during ascent." It wasn't refusal out of pride. It was the soft, weary refusal of someone who had learned the cost of staying too close to the work that once consumed him. Dr. Clark searched his expression. There was something in his eyes that didn't match his plain clothes. Something trained, wounded, disciplined, haunted. She wanted to ask more, but the girl needed her. The pilot shouted again, "We have to lift off." She nodded and stepped inside. The medics followed, one securing the stretcher, the other preparing oxygen support. Elias stepped back from the helicopter door. The governor stared at him as if torn between needing answers and fearing them. "When this is over," he said, voice trembling, "I want your name." Elias didn't respond. The helicopter lifted, beating rain into a wild pattern across the ground. Its lights cut through the storm as it rose, carrying the girl who'd survived only because fate placed one man on the wrong road at the right time. Elias watched it ascend until it disappeared into the night sky, then finally exhaled. The world around him began to reassemble. Guards speaking into radios, bystanders whispering, sirens distant but growing. But Elias remained in a stillness carved entirely by instinct and exhaustion. The guard who'd tried to stop him approached slowly, unsure whether to apologize or stay silent. Elias gave a slight nod, not forgiveness, just acknowledgement, then stepped away from the helipad. The rain softened. His breathing steadied, but something in him had already shifted. He had crossed a line he thought he'd never cross again. And now the world was going to demand answers. He stood on the wet pavement, watching the helicopter's lights fade into the storm. The moment it vanished into the clouds, the noise around him rushed back. Radios, crackling, officers shouting orders, bystanders whispering about the man who had just saved a life without permission or credentials. Elias lowered his gaze, rain dripping from his hairline, feeling the weight of what he'd just done settle across his shoulders. He'd crossed a line tonight, one he'd avoided for 7 long years. And now the world around him buzzed with questions he had no intention of answering. The security guard who'd grabbed him minutes earlier approached again, slower this time, his expression tangled with guilt. "Sir, I didn't know," he muttered. Elias didn't stop walking. He didn't need apologies. Apologies didn't change who he was now. A father trying to survive, a man who'd sworn off the life he'd been forced into tonight. "It's fine," he said softly, though the exhaustion in his voice made it clear nothing about this night felt fine at all. Rain pooled in shallow puddles across the landing zone as emergency vehicles began repositioning. An ambulance pulled up late, medics stepping out and glancing around as if trying to piece together what they'd missed. Elias kept moving, hoping to disappear into the shadows before any official realized he was still there. But the moment he stepped beyond the floodlights, a familiar voice cut through the storm. "Stop right there." Governor Kessler approached with heavy steps, suit soaked, tie hanging limp, eyes blazing with a mixture of fear, gratitude, and suspicion. He stopped a few feet away, breathing hard, hands slightly trembling. Elias met his gaze with quiet steadiness, bracing himself for the confrontation he'd hoped to avoid. "You're not leaving," the governor said, voice strained. "Not until I understand who you are." Elias remained calm. "Your daughter needed immediate intervention. I gave it. That's all." The governor shook his head, looking almost offended by the simplicity of the statement. "That's not all. What you did, no ordinary doctor could have pulled that off. Not under these conditions, not with that equipment." His voice cracked again, but this time with something closer to awe. "I've seen seasoned surgeons panic in less." Elias stepped back slightly, wanting distance. "You don't need my history to help your daughter. Focus on her, that's what matters." But the governor didn't move. He stared at Elias the way a man stares at a locked door that he knows has answers behind it. "You performed a field airway incision like you'd done it 1,000 times, he said, quieter now. "And you walked away from it like it meant nothing." Elias's jaw tightened. He didn't want to explain the years he'd spent living inside war zones, or the nights he'd held dying soldiers who whispered final messages for mothers and wives. He didn't want to relive the evening he'd lost the only person he loved more than his son, and he definitely didn't want to open the wound that had never healed. So he said nothing. Dr. Clark's voice suddenly punctured the tension. "Governor," she called as she approached, rain streaking down her forehead. "We need to move him inside. Reporters are gathering." Elias closed his eyes briefly. Reporters were the last thing he needed. The governor glanced toward the flashing lights beyond the barricade where cameras were already lifting. Then his gaze snapped back to Elias, sharper now. "You're coming with me," he said. It wasn't a question. Elias didn't argue, not because he feared the governor, but because walking away now would only raise more suspicion. And tonight wasn't a night he could afford to leave loose ends. They walked toward the hospital's side entrance together, an odd pairing. The state's most powerful man, and the soaked, silent single father who had just rewritten the fate of his family. Inside, the corridor buzzed with controlled chaos. Nurses hurried past with clipboards. Technicians, pushed equipment carts, and security tightened access to the trauma wing. Elias stayed a step behind the governor, blending into the background even when the energy around him made blending impossible. Dr. Clark walked on his other side, studying him with careful eyes, as though trying to fit him into every rumor she'd ever heard about surgeons who vanished after brilliance was overshadowed by tragedy. They reached a small operations room adjacent to the trauma bay. The governor closed the door behind them, leaving rain and noise muffled beyond the glass. Elias stood near the wall, hands resting calmly at his sides. The governor lowered himself into a chair, drenched and exhausted. "Tell me your name," he said. Elias remained still. "Names don't matter tonight." "They do when my daughter is alive because of one," the governor replied, voice raw. Dr. Clark folded her arms, speaking for the first time since entering. "Governor, I think you already suspect his background." The governor's eyes flicked to her. "I suspect many things. None make sense yet." Dr. Clark exhaled. What he did out there, only a trauma surgeon with extensive combat experience would know how to do. And not just any surgeon, one trained for hostile environments. Elias felt her gaze pressing for confirmation he wasn't ready to give. The governor's expression sharpened with realization. "Combat," he repeated softly. "So you are—" Elias interrupted gently. "What I was doesn't matter. What matters is whether she survives the next hour." The governor stared at him, chest rising and falling. Searching for answers Elias refused to reveal. Slowly, the governor stood. "When this is over," he said, voice low, "I'll find out who you are." Elias didn't respond, because he knew it was true. He also knew this crisis was far from finished, and his role in it was only beginning. He didn't reply to the governor's warning. He just held the man's gaze for a brief second before looking toward the trauma bay doors, where red lights pulsed steadily above the glass. Whatever answers the governor wanted would have to wait. The girl's life was still hanging in a razor-thin balance. Elias shifted slightly, scanning the monitors visible through the window. Her oxygen saturation had dipped again during transfer. The swelling wasn't done. He knew that pattern too well. He also knew that if the trauma team didn't make the next move correctly, everything he'd done outside would unravel. The governor followed his line of sight. Fear flashed across his face again. "They know what they're doing, right?" Elias didn't answer immediately. His silence said more than any reassurance could. Dr. Clark stepped beside him, lowering her voice. "The airway you created is holding for now, but she's going to need a secondary intervention fast. I warned the trauma lead, but they're rattled. They didn't expect her condition to be this advanced." Elias inhaled slowly, fighting the familiar tension that built in him during moments like this, the awareness that knowledge alone wasn't enough, that sometimes the only thing standing between life and loss was the courage to act again. He didn't want to step back into that role. Not here. Not in the hospital he'd once belonged to. Not in the life he'd sworn to leave behind. But when he saw Sasha's vitals flicker on the monitor, something broke through his hesitation. The governor watched him closely. "You see something wrong," he said, not asked, stated. Elias stayed quiet, but Dr. Clark answered for him. "The swelling is escalating faster than expected. If they delay the next step, her airway could collapse again." The governor's face collapsed into raw panic. "Then go in, both of you, now." Elias shook his head. "If I walk into that room uninvited, the team will freeze or fight me. That wastes time she doesn't have." The governor didn't accept that. He stormed toward the trauma bay doors and shoved them open, security trailing behind. Elias exchanged a quick look with Dr. Clark before following. Inside the trauma room, the team surrounded Sasha, the organized chaos almost familiar. Monitors chiming, nurses passing instruments, the trauma lead giving instructions through forced calm. But Elias saw the uncertainty beneath the surface. He recognized the tremble in the lead surgeon's hands, the hesitation before each order, the widening panic they were trying desperately to mask. The governor's voice thundered across the room. "Stop! Stop all of this!" The staff froze instantly. Elias stood at the threshold, watching the stillness fall like a shattered verdict. The trauma lead turned, jaw tight. "Governor, you can't interrupt a critical procedure." "Then explain why my daughter's vitals dropped again," the governor snapped. "Explain why you haven't, stabilized her airway. And explain why the only reason she's even breathing right now is because of a man you dismissed as a bystander." A heavy silence settled. Every eye turned toward Elias. This was the last thing he wanted. Attention, expectation, authority. He didn't step forward yet. He didn't want to overshadow the team or ignite conflict. But when Sasha's monitors dipped again, the room shifted into the kind of fear he couldn't ignore. The trauma lid hesitated, then sighed sharply. "If you know something we don't, step in." They didn't say his name. They didn't ask who he was. They simply stepped aside, leaving a clear path to the patient. Elias approached with the same quiet precision that had guided him through 1,000 battlefield operations. He checked the incision he'd made, assessing the swelling. It was rising dangerously fast. "She needs temporary airway support and immediate prep for formal intubation," he said softly. "But if you attempt intubation right now, you'll damage the tissue. You need to decompress it first." The trauma lead blinked. "How do you—" "I've seen this exact progression," Elias said. "Too many times." Dr. Clark moved beside him, supporting his assessment. "He's right. We need decompression first." The trauma lead hesitated. He was a skilled surgeon, but this wasn't the predictable environment he was trained for. This was improvisation under pressure. A battlefield disguised as a hospital room. Elias guided each step with calm clarity, performing a maneuver that required both steady hands and the ability to predict the next few minutes of swelling. With Dr. Clark assisting, they relieved the pressure and stabilized the airway long enough for the team to prepare for safe intubation. The monitor numbers climbed. 1 point, then another, then another. Sasha's chest rose smoothly, her first stable breath since the helicopter lift. The room exhaled. Collectively, a wave of disbelief and relief washing over everyone present. The trauma lead looked at Elias with a mixture of gratitude and bewilderment. "Who trained you?" he whispered. Elias didn't answer. He stepped back, letting the team move in to complete the formal intubation. He didn't need the spotlight. He didn't need recognition. He'd done enough. But the governor saw everything. He saw the confidence in Elias's movements. He saw the precision no ordinary doctor possessed. He saw the steadiness forged in places most people never returned from. And somewhere between fear and awe, the governor realized the truth. This man wasn't hiding because he lacked ability. He was hiding because ability had cost him something enormous. As the trauma team secured Sasha's airway, the governor turned toward Elias, voice breaking. "I need to know who you are, because you didn't just save her once, you saved her twice." Elias lowered his eyes. Because the name he carried wasn't just a title, it was a wound. Elias didn't lift his eyes when the governor demanded his name again. He stood near the corner of the trauma room, hands loose at his sides, watching the team complete the intubation he'd made possible. Sasha's vitals finally stabilized on the monitors. Slow but steady, no longer sliding toward the edge. Relief spread quietly through the room, softening shoulders and breaths. The trauma lead murmured instructions. Nurses moved with renewed confidence, and Dr. Clark stayed close, her gaze shifting back to Elias every few seconds as if confirming he was still real. The governor stepped closer, voice no longer sharp but unsteady. "You're not going to tell me who you are you?" Elias shook his head slightly, not in defiance, in exhaustion. He didn't know his past to anyone, and yet he knew the silence wouldn't last forever. People were already whispering. Staff glanced at him with curiosity and awe. Word would spread. It always did. Dr. Clark broke the moment. "Governor, let the team finish stabilizing her. We need to give them space." Her gentle authority pulled him away from Elias long enough to focus on Sasha again. The trauma lead approached Elias with cautious respect. "You saved us from making a fatal mistake," he said quietly. "Thank you." Elias gave a faint nod, nothing more. Gratitude didn't land easily on him, not after years of avoiding anything that resembled praise for the work that had once consumed his life. A nurse signaled that Sasha was ready for transport to the pediatric ICU. The team began moving quickly, preparing the gurney for safe relocation. Elias stepped out of the way, giving them full control. This was their arena now, organized, sterile, predictable. His part was over. At least he hoped it was. He watched the gurney roll past, the governor trailing behind with wide, red-rimmed eyes, caught between terror and hope. As the group exited, the room emptied around Elias until only he and Dr. Clark remained. She approached him slowly, folding her arms. "You know," she said softly, "there aren't many surgeons alive who can do what you did tonight, and none who can do it after whatever happened to you." Elias met her eyes finally. There was no judgment in them, only understanding, maybe even compassion. "I didn't come here to be recognized," he said. "I was walking home, that's all." "And yet," she replied, "you walked into a crisis like you'd been waiting for it." He didn't answer. She stepped closer, lowering her voice even more. "I know your face," she whispered. "I've seen it in old military medical briefings. You were in Kandahar, weren't you? Forward Base Bravo?" Elias's breath caught. He hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in years. The memory hit like a distant explosion. Tense, dust, chaos, the ringing of alarms, soldiers screaming for help he didn't always have enough hands to give. He looked away. Dr. Clark nodded slowly, piecing together everything his silence confirmed. "They said you disappeared after a personal loss," she continued, "left the field completely. No one knew where you went." Her tone wasn't prying. It was weighted with respect. Elias closed his eyes briefly. "Some wounds don't heal," he said. "Some scars stay inside." She softened. "And yet, you're still capable of saving a life under pressure most doctors would crumble under." He exhaled. Capable doesn't mean willing. Before she could respond, the trauma lead returned, clipboard in hand. "We need confirmation of your identity for the chart," he said hesitantly. "We can't list you as an unidentified civilian on a life-saving intervention. It'll trigger an investigation." Elias rubbed the bridge of his nose, the old fatigue returning. "List it as a field-assisted emergency performed under duress," he said. "Anonymous intervention." The trauma lead blinked. "That's unusual." "It's also accurate," Elias replied quietly. Dr. Clark stepped in. "Give him time," she told the lead surgeon. "There's more happening here than a protocol form." The trauma lead nodded reluctantly and left. Silence settled between Elias and Dr. Clark. the kind of silence that comes when two people understand the deeper cost of what has just happened. Elias moved toward the door, ready to slip away again before the governor returned with more questions. But as he stepped into the hallway, he caught sight of something that made him stop. Down the corridor, reporters were already gathering behind a security barrier, cameras flashing, microphones raised. Word had spread faster than he expected, too fast, and the governor was talking to them, not angrily, not politically, but with the raw, shaken voice of a father who had tasted the fear of losing a child. Elias watched from a distance. "He saved her," the governor was saying into the microphones. "A man we don't know. A man who appeared at the exact moment we needed a miracle." Elias stiffened as the governor continued. "When I find him, when I learn who he is, he will have my gratitude, my protection, and my full support. This state owes him more than we can express." Elias stepped back into the shadows. He knew what came next. Public recognition, attention, calls for interviews, the reopening of a past he had spent years burying. The crisis wasn't over, not by a long shot. And now the world wanted a name he wasn't ready to give. He stayed in the shadows, the echo of the governor's words rippling through the corridor like a warning bell. Reporters pressed against the barrier, cameras flashing, their excitement growing with every sentence the governor uttered. Elias knew what that meant. Attention was coming like a flood. Once the story broke, once people connected the dots, the quiet life he'd built for Milo would collapse. He stepped back farther into the dim alcove beside an equipment room, steadying his breath as he tried to think. The last thing he wanted was to be pulled into the spotlight again. He'd already survived one world that demanded too much. He wasn't ready to survive another. But before he could slip away down the side hallway, a nurse hurried toward him, breath short. "You there, wait!" Elias froze. The nurse lowered her voice. "The governor's asking where you went. Security's sweeping the floor." Elias glanced toward the chaos of reporters. "Tell them I left." "They won't believe that," she said, "not with what he's saying out there." Her eyes held quiet awe. "He called you a miracle." Elias gave a small nod, but the compliment only deepened the tightness in his chest. He thanked the nurse with a quiet gesture and moved quickly down the hall, ducking into the stairwell. The heavy door closed behind him, muffling the reporters' voices. He took the stairs upward, 2 steps at a time, reaching the 3rd-floor landing where the pediatric wing connected with the service corridor. From here, he could exit the building without crossing any public areas. But the moment he cracked open the service door, he saw the silhouette of Governor Kessler standing alone at the end of the hallway, not surrounded by staff, not guarded by security, alone, shoulders dropped, tie loose, hands clasped as if bracing himself. Elias almost turned back, but the governor lifted his head, sensing movement, and their eyes met. "Don't run," the governor said quietly. No force, no command, just a plea. Elias stepped reluctantly into the hall, letting the door close behind him. The governor approached slowly, exhaustion etched across his face. "I meant what I said down there. I owe you more than I can ever repay." Elias shook his head. "I didn't do this for repayment." "No," the governor replied. "That's exactly why I need to understand who you are." Elias looked away, jaw clenched. The governor followed his gaze to a nearby window, where rain streaked the glass. "The press are calling you the Phantom Doctor," he said with a faint, humorless breath. "They think you're some anonymous hero with training no one can trace." Elias remained silent. "But I don't believe in phantoms. I believe in men who've suffered so deeply they disappear." That struck a nerve. He didn't show it, But the shift in his expression, the tightening of his shoulders, wasn't lost on the governor. "You vanished once," the governor said quietly. "You're trying to vanish again, but you can't outrun what you did tonight. You saved my daughter not once, but twice, and the world will try to uncover you whether you want it or not." Elias exhaled slowly, steadying himself. "Your daughter is stable. That's what matters." "Yes," the governor replied, "and I want the man who saved her to have protection. Not scrutiny, not exposure, protection." Elias frowned slightly at that. Protection wasn't something he expected or trusted. The governor stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Whatever happened to you, whatever made you leave medicine, it must have been devastating." Elias didn't answer. He didn't need to. The governor pressed on. "If the wrong people dig into your past, it could hurt you and your son. Let me help." Elias stiffened. "Leave my son out of this." The governor raised both hands, palms open. "I meant what I said. I want to help, not harm. You saved my family. Let me protect yours." The sincerity unsettled him. He had expected confrontation, accusation, maybe even anger. But what stood before him was a father clinging to gratitude like a lifeline. It wasn't hostility that drove the governor's questions. It was fear. Fear of losing his child. Fear of owing a debt he didn't know how to repay. Fear of failing his family the way Elias had failed his own, once, long ago. Dr. Clark appeared at the hallway's far end, walking quickly. "Governor," she called, "the ICU team wants to update you." The governor turned toward her but didn't move. "Is she stable?" "Yes," Dr. Clark said. "Your daughter is doing better than any of us expected." Relief washed over his face. Raw, overwhelming, almost enough to bring him to his knees. He closed his eyes briefly, gathering himself. Then he looked back at Elias. "I won't force the truth out of you," he said. "Not tonight, but I'm going to find a way to repay what you did." Elias didn't answer. He didn't know if there was anything to repay. Not the loss he carried, not the mistakes he lived with. But the governor stepped back slowly, giving him room. "Wherever you go," he said, "understand this. I don't see the man who was fired. I see the man who saved my child when no one else could." He walked away with Dr. Clark, heading toward the ICU. Elias remained in the hallway alone, but he felt the shift. His anonymity was slipping. His past was knocking. The crisis that pulled him back into medicine wasn't finished with him yet, and the world was about to start connecting his name to a miracle he never wanted credit for. He remained in the hallway long after the governor and Dr. Clark disappeared around the corner. The air felt heavier now, thick with consequences. He wasn't just a nameless bystander anymore. He wasn't invisible. He wasn't forgotten. And the world, starting with the governor, the reporters, and now half the hospital, was pulling his buried identity toward the surface with the force of a rising tide. Elias leaned against the wall, letting the hum of fluorescent lights settle around him. Somewhere above, Milo was likely asleep at home, unaware that everything about their quiet life was at risk of changing by morning. He pushed off the wall and began walking toward the back stairwell, hoping to slip out through a staff exit before anyone stopped him again. But the moment he reached the stairwell, Dr. Clark stepped out from a side room, blocking his path with a determined expression. "Thought you'd try to disappear again," she said. Elias halted. "I need to go home." "I know," she replied gently. "But not yet. The ICU lead is asking for you." Elias gave a quiet, tired exhale. "They don't need me anymore. They can take it from here." Dr. Clark didn't move. "They can continue because of you, but that's not why they're asking." She studied him closely, searching for cracks in the armor he kept around his past. "It's her father," she added. "He wants you updated on her condition." Privately. Elias stiffened. He didn't want another confrontation. He didn't want gratitude. He didn't want anything that attached his life to theirs. "I don't need updates," he murmured. "I already know what her next few hours look like." "But he doesn't," Dr. Clark replied softly. Reluctance battled with responsibility inside him. He knew the pattern of airway swelling, the timeline of post-intervention stabilization, the risks that lingered beneath the surface. Walking away now wasn't just about preserving his anonymity. It was about ignoring the fact that a family was teetering between hope and fear. And he'd been on both sides of that divide before. Finally, he nodded once. Dr. Clark moved aside, letting him follow her to the ICU. The hallways quieted as they climbed toward the more secluded floor, the hum of monitors replacing the chaos below. When they stepped into the pediatric ICU wing, Elias spotted the governor standing alone beside a glass-walled room, his posture rigid, hands clasped tight. He looked smaller here, less like a leader and more like a man begging the universe for mercy. He turned. At the sound of their approach, relief briefly softening his expression. "She's breathing steadily," he said. "The team says she's stabilizing faster than expected." Elias studied the monitors through the glass. The girl's oxygenation had improved. Her coloring looked better. Her body was fighting and winning. "She's responding well," Elias confirmed. "The next 6 hours are important. After that, her chances improve a lot." The governor nodded slowly. "I don't know how to thank you." Elias shifted uncomfortably. "You don't need to." "But I do," the governor insisted, stepping closer. "I don't want this to be another story where a man saves a life and walks into obscurity as if it never happened." Elias didn't meet his eyes. "Some stories are meant to stay quiet." "Not this one," the governor said. "Not when it involves my family." Dr. Clark watched the exchange carefully. She sensed Elias retreating into himself, the way people do when acknowledgement feels like reopening a wound. "He's not asking for praise," she said softly. "Just space." But the governor wasn't ready to let go. "At least tell me your son is safe," he said. Elias froze. The governor's tone changed instantly. "I'm not threatening you, I promise. I just want to know you're not doing all this alone." Elias's voice was quieter than before. "My son is fine. He's why I'm trying to leave before this becomes something it shouldn't." The governor exhaled slowly, realizing the truth. Elias wasn't protecting himself. He was protecting Milo. Before either of them could speak again, footsteps echoed down the hall. A nurse approached with a tablet in hand. "Governor, the press is demanding a comment. They're downstairs requesting more details about the man who intervened." Elias stiffened. Dr. Clark glanced between them, sensing the shift. The governor's jaw tightened. "Tell them. Nothing," he ordered. "Not until I speak with him." The nurse nodded and left. The governor turned back to Elias, tone gentler now. "I meant what I said earlier. I want to repay what you did, but I won't drag your name into this without your consent." Elias looked at him for a long moment, weighing the sincerity in his voice. The governor wasn't a perfect man. He wasn't even a calm man. But he was a father fighting for the person he loved most. And Elias understood that better than he'd ever admit. "You keep her safe," Elias said quietly. "That's repayment enough." The governor shook his head. "It's not. But it's a start." Dr. Clark gently touched Elias's arm, grounding him. "There's something else," she said. "The ICU team wants you to sign the intervention documentation. They won't release updates without your identifier on file. Elias's shoulders tensed. The paper trail he'd been trying to avoid was waiting for him. He took a breath. This was the moment he'd been trying to outrun, but running wasn't an option anymore. "Where's the paperwork?" Elias asked. Dr. Clark exhaled in relief and gestured for him to follow. As they walked toward the ICU desk, Elias paused for a brief second, allowing the weight of what came next to settle. His name, the one he had tried so hard to bury, was about to return to a system he'd abandoned. And the world was waiting downstairs. By the way, if you're still here, hit subscribe with the bell on, because this story is about to shift into a whole different storm. He followed Dr. Clark toward the ICU desk, each step heavier than the last. The hallway felt narrower now, as though the building itself sensed what he was about to do. The clerk behind the counter straightened when she saw them approach, sliding a stack of forms across the surface. Elias stared at the papers, black and white proof that anonymity wouldn't last, that the quiet life he'd built around Milo was shifting piece by piece into something he couldn't control. Dr. Clark gave him space, stepping back just enough to let him breathe. "They need a physician identifier," she said gently. "Just a signature." He reached for the pen, hesitating for a fraction of a second. He hadn't signed anything medical, not officially Haas, in 7 years. His hand hovered, and memories flashed like quick, painful cuts. War tents, dust, screams, hospital rooms. The night everything shattered. The night he lost the woman he loved and walked away from the world that couldn't save her. He forced his breath steady and signed. The name looked foreign to him, not because he didn't recognize it, but because it belonged to a life he thought was buried. He pushed the forms back to the clerk. She looked at the signature, eyes widening. We'll update the system immediately, Dr. Ward." He flinched. The title hit him harder than expected. Dr. Clark noticed the reaction and gently touched his arm again. "You just helped save a life. Don't apologize for being who you are." He didn't respond. He wasn't sure he could. The governor appeared at the far end of the corridor just as the clerk rushed away with the forms. His steps were slower now, less frantic, more weighted with exhaustion and emotion. But the moment he saw Elias standing by the counter, something like relief washed over him. "I was coming to find you." Elias stiffened. "I thought you were with your daughter." "I was," the governor said. "She's asleep. The team says tonight was the turning point." His voice cracked softly. "Because of you." Elias shifted, uncomfortable with the praise. "The team saved her. I helped stabilize her, that's all." The governor shook his head. "That's not all. I've been standing beside her bed, watching her breathe because you refused to let her die on a road in the rain." He stepped closer, lowering his voice but keeping every syllable steady. "And I need you to understand something. What you did, it changed everything." Elias didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. Dr. Clark cleared her throat. "Governor, he just signed the documentation. The hospital now recognizes him as the primary field surgeon who intervened." The governor exhaled deeply, a mix of gratitude and dread. "Then the press will want his name even more." Elias tensed. He thought of Milo, his safety, his privacy, the fragile stability of their world. "I don't want my son exposed," he said quietly. "I don't want attention. I don't want cameras near him." The governor nodded. "I promised I'd protect that. And I will." Elias studied him carefully. "How?" "By taking control before the reporters do," the governor said. "If I handle the narrative, we can shape what the world sees and what it doesn't. We keep you unnamed publicly. A private hero, a protected identity. Elias didn't trust easily, but the governor's tone carried sincerity born of fear, gratitude, and the fierce desperation of a father who understood what it meant to lose too much. Before Elias could answer, the ICU doors swung open and a nurse hurried toward them. "Governor, your daughter is waking up." His breath caught. He didn't thank the nurse or say a word. He ran. Dr. Clark motioned for Elias to follow. "You should be there. She'll want to know who saved her." He didn't move at first, then he did. They entered the ICU room quietly. Sasha lay beneath soft lights, pale but alive, blinking slowly as her father reached her bedside. "Sweetheart," he whispered, brushing her hair gently. Her gaze drifted, unfocused, until she saw Elias standing near the door. Her brows knitted slightly as if her mind was trying to place him. "You," she rasped faintly around the oxygen support. "I remember. Your voice." Elias stepped closer, keeping his movements calm and unintrusive. "You're safe now," he said softly. "Your team is taking good care of you." The governor watched the interaction with a mixture of awe and fragile emotion. Something settled inside him. Not just gratitude, but a deeper understanding of the man standing before him. A man who had carried tragedies he didn't speak about. A man who hid not because he lacked skill, but because skill had cost him dearly. When Sasha drifted back to sleep, the governor motioned for Elias to step into the hallway. Dr. Clark joined them, closing the door gently behind her. The governor looked at Elias with a steadiness that hadn't been there earlier. "You didn't just save her life. You anchored this hospital when everything was falling apart." He paused. "And you anchored me." Elias didn't know how to absorb that. He wasn't used to being seen so clearly. Dr. Clark spoke next. "There's something you need to know. Word is spreading among the staff. People are asking who you are. Some are already searching the archives." She hesitated. "And they'll find you eventually." Elias felt the familiar ache in his chest, the warning that his past was rising from the ground he'd buried it under. The governor stepped closer. "Then, let me stand between you and whatever comes. Let me repay what you did for my daughter." Elias didn't commit, but he didn't refuse either. He looked through the ICU glass at Sasha sleeping peacefully, then down the hall toward the exit, where reporters waited for a name he no longer wanted to hide or reveal. The crisis had begun pulling his life in a direction he hadn't chosen, and he sensed the next collision was already on its way. He stood in the ICU hallway staring at Sasha through the glass, the governor's offer echoing in his mind. Protection, support, repayment. Words that sounded generous, even noble, but Elias knew what came with attention. Questions, exposure, people, digging until they found the scars he'd spent years hiding beneath routine and fatherhood. He felt the weight of it pressing against his ribs, an old pressure he'd hoped never to feel again. The governor stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You're not alone in this. Whatever comes next, reporters, hospital politics, public attention, let me take the weight." Elias didn't respond, but his silence wasn't refusal. It was the sound of a man calculating, trying to understand the cost of accepting help versus the cost of refusing it. He looked back at Sasha, steady breathing rising beneath her blankets. Her survival was the reason all this mattered, and protecting Milo was the reason all this terrified him. Dr. Clark's voice cut in gently. "There's something else you both need to see." She led them down the corridor toward a staff lounge with a wide window overlooking the parking lot. The moment they entered, Elias felt his stomach tighten. Reporters had tripled since earlier. News vans crowded the curbs. Metal barricades strained under the push of bodies. Cameras flashed like lightning against the building's glass. The governor moved closer to the window, jaw tightening. They're already calling it the highway miracle. Dr. Clark nodded. Every news outlet wants a statement about the anonymous surgeon who saved your daughter. And the hospital, well, they aren't handling it gracefully. As if on cue, her radio crackled. A voice from administration demanded updates, questions about liabilities, inquiries about the unidentified medical intervener. Dr. Clark muted it with a frustrated sigh. They're scrambling. They're terrified someone will sue them for not having a trauma doctor ready. And once your daughter's case becomes public, they'll try to control the narrative. Elias leaned against the counter, eyes narrowing. He could already see where this was going. They'll want to absolve themselves? Exactly, Dr. Clark said. And they'll do it by dragging you into the spotlight, either as a hero they can claim or as a problem they can blame. Elias stared at the floor, jaw clenched. He had no interest in being a pawn in their press statements. The governor turned toward him, resolve sharpening. Then we don't let them dictate anything. He approached Elias, lowering his voice. Let me make something clear. I won't allow them to twist what you did, not after tonight, not ever. Before Elias could answer, footsteps thundered down the hallway. A young resident rushed into the lounge. Governor Kessler, the administration wants you in the boardroom immediately. They're preparing a public briefing. The governor's face darkened. Without asking me about my daughter? The resident swallowed. Yes, sir. They've already drafted the statement. Elias rubbed his temples. This was the exact storm he wanted to avoid. Power, fear, spin, institutions masking their failures with polished language. The governor moved toward the door, then paused and turned back to Elias. Come with me. Elias stiffened. Why? Because this briefing is going to shape the entire narrative. I need the truth in the room. Dr. Clark nodded firmly. He's right. If they give a version of events that's incomplete or misleading, it'll spiral out of control. Elias hesitated. He had spent years walking away from rooms like that. Rooms where people debated tragedy like policy. Rooms where decisions cost lives. But this time, he wasn't walking in as a doctor. He was walking in as the only witness who knew exactly how Sasha survived the first minutes of her crisis, and the only one with nothing to gain. He followed them. They walked through the administrative floor, where fluorescent lights hummed above polished tile. Outside the boardroom, voices clashed, executives arguing, legal staff whispering about liability, PR teams rehearsing lines. When the governor entered, the room snapped silent. The hospital director stood at the head of the table, fingers steepled. Governor Kessler, she began with a practiced smile. We are preparing the official statement regarding tonight's events. Given your daughter's condition, we thought it best. The governor cut her off. Your doctor never arrived. A hush fell. The director swallowed. There were unforeseen obstacles. And a man you fired saved her life, the governor added. Every head turned toward Elias. He felt the weight of those stares, confusion, curiosity, fear, and calculation. The director blinked. This individual? The governor's tone hardened. This individual is the only reason my daughter is alive. A PR manager leaned forward nervously. Sir, we need clarity for the media. Who performed the procedure? Was it authorized? Do we list him as a current clinician? Elias stepped forward, voice quiet but unmistakably steady. List what happened exactly as it happened. A child was dying. Your team froze, and I intervened because time didn't care about bureaucracy. The director bristled. That intervention places us in a complicated position. Legally, The governor slammed a hand onto the table. Legally, he did your job. The room jolted. Elias stepped back, unwilling to be drawn deeper into conflict. "I'm not here to be praised or blamed," he said. "I'm here to make sure your statement doesn't distort the truth." Dr. Clark entered behind them, adding with measured calm, "I will verify every detail, and I'll testify if necessary about what this man did." Executives exchanged uneasy glances. Their polished narrative was collapsing. The governor leaned forward. "I'll tell the press myself if I have to, but this statement will honor what happened, accurately." Silence answered him. Finally, the director nodded stiffly. "We'll revise." The tension in the room fractured. Elias felt the strain pressing harder than before. The crisis was shifting, from medical to political, from desperation to fallout. As they left the boardroom, Dr. Clark exhaled. "That was a battle." Elias nodded. "The real one's coming when the press conference starts." The governor turned toward him. "You won't face it alone." Elias didn't answer, because he still didn't know whether stepping into the light was safer or more dangerous than staying in the shadows. He walked out of the boardroom with the governor and Dr. Clark, the weight of the confrontation still tightening his shoulders. The corridor outside buzzed faintly with distant activity. Nurses changing shifts, machines humming in patient rooms, security moving toward the lobby as the press grew impatient. But around Elias, everything felt muted. He sensed the turning point the moment the director agreed to revise the statement. The hospital's grip on the narrative had loosened, and now the world's eyes were shifting toward him, toward the nameless figure behind the miracle. They reached a quieter stretch of hallway near the ICU elevators. The governor slowed his pace, letting the doors close before speaking. "We need to talk strategy," he said, measured and calm. Elias braced himself. "If this is about going public—" "It's not," the governor cut in. "Not unless you want it." Elias didn't. He already felt his life teetering toward exposure. The governor raised both hands, showing no threat. "I promised to protect your identity, and I meant it. But that means choosing our moves before the media frenzy grows." Dr. Clark stepped beside them, folding her arms. "The hospital wants to release a controlled statement within the hour. They'll try to praise the staff while minimizing any mention of an outside intervention." Elias wasn't surprised. "They want to protect themselves." "Exactly," she said. "But the problem is, that story doesn't match what actually happened, and the governor just publicly promised honesty." The governor nodded. "If we let them control the statement, you become a rumor. A mystery the press will chase harder." Elias exhaled slowly. That was the trap. Rumors didn't disappear. Rumors invited digging, and digging led back to the night he lost his wife, the night he walked away from the trauma unit forever, the night he pulled Milo into his arms and vowed never to let the world take anything from him again. He leaned against the wall, rubbing the back of his neck. "So, what do you want me to do?" The governor didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked through the small ICU window, watching Sasha sleep. His voice softened. "Be present, that's all. Just stand with me when I address the press. I won't name you, I won't expose you. But your presence tells the truth without giving away what you're trying to protect." Elias tensed. "You want me on camera?" "Not identified," the governor said quickly. "Not interviewed, just visible. So the hospital can't erase you." Dr. Clark added gently, "And so they can't lie about what happened." Elias looked between them, two people desperate to do right, even if the path wasn't perfect. His instincts pushed him to run, to disappear down a back stairwell and vanish into the rain the same way he arrived. But a deeper instinct, the one that never let him walk past a crisis, kept him rooted in place. "Just stand with me," the governor said again. "Let the world see that someone stepped in. Let them see the truth, even if they don't know your name." Before Elias could respond, a sudden alarm pierced the hallway. They snapped to attention. The governor spun toward the ICU. "Is that her?" Dr. Clark was already sprinting toward the doors. "It's a general pediatric alarm, not hers, specifically, but we need to check." She waved them forward. Elias felt his pulse sharpen. Every old instinct surged alive as they entered the unit. Inside, nurses rushed toward room 307, 2 doors down from Sasha's. A small boy convulsed in his bed while a team scrambled for supplies. Dr. Clark moved fast, snapping orders, stabilizing the airway, pushing medication. Elias instinctively scanned the scene, assessing, but he didn't step in. Not this time. Dr. Clark had it under control, and watching her steady hands, confident voice, and sharp judgment reminded him of something he needed to face. He wasn't the only capable surgeon here. Minutes later, the crisis resolved. The boy's breathing eased. Staff exchanged sighs of relief as the room settled. Dr. Clark stepped back, wiping her forehead. Elias met her gaze. "You handled that." She gave a tired smile. "Not my first pediatric emergency." Elias nodded with quiet respect. The governor, still shaken, stood by Sasha's door. "Seeing that, it reminds me how fragile all of this is." He looked at Elias. "Why did you leave medicine?" Elias froze. The question hit him deeper than any he'd faced tonight. He swallowed. "My wife died during a trauma shift, complications, unpredictable. I couldn't stay in the same halls that took her from me." The governor's face softened with understanding. "And your son? He was 6. I had to choose between being a doctor who lost himself in grief or being a father who stayed present." Silence wrapped around them, heavy but honest. The governor stepped closer. "Elias, you may have walked away from medicine, but medicine never walked away from you. Tonight proved that." Elias looked through the glass at Sasha, breathing steadily, her vitals strong. Saving her felt like reopening a wound, he admitted, but it also felt like something good. Dr. Clark approached slowly. "You don't need to decide your future tonight, but you do need to protect the one you have. The press briefing will start in 20 minutes. Elias inhaled deeply. He wasn't a phantom anymore. He wasn't invisible. He wasn't just a fired single dad walking home in the rain. He was the man the world was about to glimpse, even if only in silhouette. And this time, he wouldn't run. He stood outside the ICU, the hallway washed in a quiet stillness that didn't match the storm gathering downstairs. 20 minutes. That was all the time left before the press briefing began, the moment when everything he'd tried to keep buried might start resurfacing. Dr. Clark watched him closely, sensing the weight of his silence. The governor stood near the window, hands clasped behind his back, the posture of a man preparing for something difficult but necessary. Elias stepped forward. "I'll go with you," he said, finally breaking the tension. "But I don't want my name spoken, not even hinted." "Ah," Governor nodded. "I gave you my word." Elias met his eyes. "And if this turns messy, then I take the hit," the governor finished. "Not you." That truth settled something inside Elias. He wasn't used to people standing between him and danger. Not since before the war, before the hospital, before loss carved a hollow in his chest. But tonight, the governor wasn't doing this as a leader. He was doing it as a father. The distinction mattered. Dr. Clark stepped closer, handing Elias a plain surgical jacket. Wear this. It'll obscure your uniform and make you blend in with staff. The less attention you draw, the better." Elias slipped it on, the familiar weight of the fabric stirring old memories. Not all painful. Some filled with purpose, the kind that once drove him to save lives even when he was breaking inside. They walked together toward the elevator. Each floor they descended pulled them deeper into the noise building below. By the time they reached the lobby, they could hear the reporters, the rapid clatter of shutters, the low roar of voices, the snapping tension of unanswered questions. Security opened the staff side door. The governor stepped through first. Elias followed behind, keeping his head low but his posture steady. The lights hit them immediately, harsh, bright, unfiltered. Cameras turned, microphones surged forward. The press recognized the governor instantly, swarming him with questions. But they didn't know who Elias was. Not yet. That anonymity, for the moment, held. The governor raised a hand, commanding silence. The crowd quieted enough for his voice to carry. "Tonight, my daughter survived a medical emergency that should have taken her life," he began, voice steady but layered with emotion. "She was trapped between minutes no child should experience, minutes where hesitation becomes fatal." Cameras zoomed in. Murmurs spread. Elias stayed behind him, partially shielded by Dr. Clark's position. The governor continued. "A man stepped forward. A man who owed us nothing, who was walking home after losing his job, who saw a child in danger and didn't hesitate." A spark rippled through the crowd. Interest, curiosity, confusion. He stabilized her airway when there was no time to reach a hospital. He kept her alive long enough for specialists to take over. And he did it without asking for a name, recognition, or reward. Questions erupted. Who is he? Is he a doctor? Is he here now? Where did he come from? The governor lifted a hand again. "He is here, but he will remain anonymous by his own choice. This briefing is not to expose him. It is to honor him." Some reporters frowned, frustrated. Others scribbled faster. Elias remained motionless, letting the governor's words absorb the tension. The governor stepped aside slightly, but not enough to reveal Elias fully. "I will not answer questions about his identity. What I will say is this: he saved my child when the system around her faltered. And tonight, I want the world to remember something. Heroes don't always wear badges. Sometimes they're walking home in the rain, unseen, unheard, and still willing to act." The lobby filled with a softer kind of silence, not confusion, but respect. Even the cameras seemed to settle. Dr. Clark leaned toward Elias and whispered, "You don't have to move. He's shielding you perfectly." But something in Elias shifted. He lifted his head slightly, not enough to give a clear view of his face, but enough for the crowd to see a silhouette stepping closer beside the governor. A ripple went through the room. Not recognition, not exposure. Recognition of presence. A symbol, not a name. The governor didn't react outwardly, but his voice softened. "He stands with me tonight to confirm one thing, that every life is worth fighting for, even when the world is watching or when no one is." Reporters stepped forward again, but none dared push too hard now. Elias felt the pressure ease. He wasn't being dragged into the light. He was choosing how much light touched him. The moment passed naturally. The governor concluded the briefing, security guiding them back toward the staff doors. When the lobby doors shut behind them, Dr. Clark let out a long breath. "You handled that with more composure than half the physicians in this building." Elias gave a small, tired smile. "Composure is easier when you're not the one talking." The governor faced him directly. I'll make sure the world knows the truth without compromising your privacy. And if you ever need anything, you come to me." Elias nodded, not out of obligation, out of respect earned through crisis, honesty, and shared fear. They returned to the ICU one last time. Sasha slept peacefully. The room glowed softly around her. Elias stood near the door, letting the sight settle the final ache inside him. He had saved a life. He had confronted a past he feared. He had protected his son's future. And he had walked back into the world he once fled, without losing himself. If you're still here following this journey, make sure to like the video and subscribe so you never miss a story like this again.